Hey there everybody and welcome back. For those of you that are looking to learn how to build some kind of a chat application, whether it be a web app or a mobile app, or you just want to add this functionality to your current app, and if you want to learn how to do this without needing to learn all of these different coding skills, and you want to learn to do it completely free, or at least get started for free, stay tuned. I'm going to cover how to do that in today's video. Now before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the channel for new content. All right, so jumping straight in, one of the questions I get is how are we doing this for free? So we're using the Community Edition of Appgyver, which is a free codeless development tool or a low-code tool. And then we're going to use a free tier on Firebase, and you'll see that the one I'm using is currently empty. Now what I'm going to be doing is the app that we're going to be building today, I'm going to actually put it in the free download section over at codelessfix.com. So you can just go to CodelessFix under coded apps or codeless apps. You can go to free downloads and you'll see this page here. Now let's start out with a demo of this application, and then we're going to walk through how to build it, because even if you download it from CodelessFix, you will still need to know how to set it up for yourself. So we're going to do the demo first. So we aren't covering any kind of security or anything like that in this video, so make sure that you're following any and all applicable laws, rules, regulations, guidelines, etc. for handling user data, account info, and all of that. So when we first start in the application, we'll go to our My Account page. So the web app on the left, I'm logged in with one email address. The web app on the right, I'm logged in with another. So they are two different accounts. So we're going to start by making a username. So we're going to start out with 123. We will click Check Availability. Username's available because the database is empty, so we'll click Set. Now we're going to go over here, try to type in the same thing. We'll click Check Availability. You'll see it's taken. So if we try to click Set, it'll say Error. So if we add 4 and click Set, because we know that's available, you'll see it works. So no problems so far. Now, one thing that I have noticed is there seems to be, I don't know if it's a delay or what, between the Android app and then the web app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this here, and then I'm going to go over to the web app, and we'll just get started by adding the friend. So this chat app is the one we were just in, so I'm going to add that person, which is 1234. We're just going to click Add, and you'll see that they've been added to the friends list. Nothing too intense there. We can actually go ahead and repeat the same process here and just add friend 123. Very, very self-explanatory. So I'll back out of the app, and then we're going to stick to the web app right now and go ahead and get this chat set up. Very simple process. So the chat page doesn't do anything by itself. You have to populate the data for it by basically selecting the user. So when we click a new user, you're going to see that we get these toast notifications that tell us what it's doing. You can actually cut that functionality out later, but what we're going to do is we're going to click OK to start the chat. So you don't need those messages. They're just kind of one of those things that'll help you with troubleshooting, which we'll go through later. So now we are in the chat. Pretty straightforward. If we want to send a message, we can just type in hey and click send. And then what we can do is we'll just kind of wait for things to populate, even though it already has. We'll go on the back end and just show you how we're already getting some data populating. So the profiles appear here and profile details here. We'll be able to cover the difference in both of those in a bit, but the idea is one of them is your username, the other one is a list of usernames. That way we can check if one is available. Now, this one right here, we can go over a little bit later as well, but the general idea is this is the user ID in Firebase tied to a username. Same thing here. And then lastly, this is the chat that's set up. So it's the username for the first person plus the username for the second person. Pretty straightforward. And then we have our individual chats in here. So when we're in our chat, you'll see we have our messages. So if we decide, you know what, I want to see, do I have any messages? I just added my friend 123, want to check my chats and see what's going on. So if we click 123, you'll see we have that little toast message we can ignore here, but you'll see the chat's there. So now if we want to see, okay, let's say, hey, or we'll say something different just to show that it's different. So you'll see it says, hey back, and you'll see it pops up here. And then we can continue typing back and forth, and it'll appear on both screens and show which user's typing what and where. And then you'll also see those chats appearing here, and they'll appear with the newest one at the bottom. Now, the last thing that we would want to test is what happens if there's a different user. So this is not an ideal user flow, but let's just say we want to set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now when we go to people, it gets a little bit more complicated because we're technically logged into the same account. So to just kind of let things sync up, I'll back out of the app, but we know that I'm currently user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll go to people here, and I'll add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you'll see that in a moment it'll appear here. And when I click this, I get the toast messages, which again you can remove, and we're going to start the chat because none exists. So now we could start out with saying something like, hey, other person. And we can send that message. And let's say, okay, you know what? It's going to take a second or two for it to populate. Then we have to wait for them to reply. So let's go check on our chat with 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll see we have all of the original messages. And then we can go back to this one at a later date. So then when we log into our app, because we should now be, if we check our account, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can go to people, and it has the original friend. And you'll see it's now showing, hey, other person, 1, 2, 3. So when we type in here and click send, it'll populate on this side and on this side, and we're continuing in that chat. But the idea is if we had multiple friends, we could just jump back and forth between the two. So pretty straightforward. Now that we are seeing how the app works, let's go ahead and we'll close this and then expand this. And we'll walk through how to actually build this application together. Don't get scared by this first screen that comes up. It's very easy to explain and understand, for the most part. So let's jump in. So first thing you need to do is go ahead and build your own Firestore database. Super simple. You basically just go to the Firebase website, click Start Project. I have other videos if you want to learn the basics of that. I'm going to try to make this a quick video here. And then the first thing you're going to need to do is under the Build section, you're going to need to go to Authentication, and you're going to need to click Enable. And then once you've done that, you'll go to Sign-in method and make sure that email and password is enabled. And you can always just click Add a new provider to find the other providers here. Then you're going to go to Firestore Database and click Enable, and the same process. And then if you want, you can set up storage and real-time database as well. Now, for this video, we're going to be using a database with open rules. So when you set up Firestore database, for the purposes of testing, what I've done is yours will look identical to this. The only difference is right here, yours is going to say false, which is not a big deal. I set mine to true, which means anyone can read and write to it, which is why I said at the beginning of this video I'm not covering security rules, so be careful with that. Just means anyone can read or write to it. It's pretty self-explanatory. So once this has been set up, yours will look like mine did at the beginning of the video where I showed you that this was completely empty. Now, once that's been set up, we're going to go to Project Overview, Project Settings, and from this page, what you're going to do is you're going to go to Add App, and then you're going to go to Web App. You'll name it and go through the steps or processes. I've covered this in quite a few different videos, and you should actually be able to see general setup instructions here if you need to, but the general idea is when you name your app and you click register and you click next, it's going to give you something like this. It'll show your web app right here. You'll have your app ID and all of the information you need right here. And then you're going to do the same process, add app. You'll click Android. You'll fill out the relevant information and basically go through those steps. And then you can go here and click Google Services.json. When you download and open this, it's going to have all the information you need basically in here. So to show you what you need to do with that now is you're going to go into Appgyver. You're going to start your new app, your new project, whatever it is, and you're going to go in this Data tab. Now, then you go into connectors, and you're going to need to set up the connectors, basically each of the ones that you need. So we're using Android and web app only. So what you'll do, first and foremost, for Android, you'll grab the app ID right here and simply paste it in right here. The API key and the client ID will be available in here. You should be able to find your client info and your API key as well. Then, once you've done that for Android, you can scroll down, and for the web app, pretty much everything should be available in here. Your app ID, API key, auth domain, message sender ID, app ID, all of that, you're just copying what's in between the double quotes into each of the relevant places here. Now, if you want to do it for iOS, it's the exact same process. Add app, follow the steps, and then you're going, for Apple, you're going to get something different, so it's not going to be called the exact same thing, but you'll download this file, which you can open in most IDEs or Notepad or Notepad++. Basically, you can open it, find your API key, relevant bits of information, and paste them in. So it's pretty straightforward. So the app I'm giving you, this should all be empty. You would need to fill this in yourself. So once that's been done, if you need to actually build this app and export it online, make sure that you keep this Google Services JSON file and the other Apple file. You can check out my channel for how to export the app, but you can always get those later from here. So that's covering how to get that page set up. Now, if you're doing it from scratch in Appgyver, then you need to click on the Auth tab and click Enable Auth or Authentication and choose the Firebase option, and then follow the steps that we just went through. What this does is it'll give you a page by default called Firebase Authentication. Now on this page, I haven't done anything aside from delete the default picture, but you can make any changes you need to here. Then once Firebase Authentication has been essentially done, it dismisses the initial view, which means basically go into the app. So from there, it should open this as our home page. So we have a navigation with 3 pages. If you need to add a page, all you need to do is click up here and click Add Page, and we have 3 that we are going to break down together today. So the very first thing that we're probably going to want to cover, just to make it easier, is how to actually get started in the app. So for that, we're going to start in the Setup page. So what we're going to do here is we have a title and a text component. Now on this page, I have added the following variable, username. While you're adding this variable, you might as well go ahead and add the app variable project, and here is going to be your project ID from Firebase. When you're in Firebase, this will typically appear next to the text project in the URL. Then we're also going to have temp profile URL, which is an app variable. Now, when we're on this page, we're going to have a couple of things that are going to happen. So we're going to put all the components here first. So we have title, text, and button, and input field. And then we also have a list divider. I'm pointing those out because you can just drag them into the page. So this top one, we've just clicked it and called it Setup. The next one, what I've done is I've clicked Formula, and in this box, I've typed in double quotes, current username, semicolon space, and then I put plus space, pagevars.username. Now, if this seems confusing or you don't know where I got this, when you go to page variables, you can just double click the relevant username. This is the one that we just made together. And basically what this is doing is this text will always stay the same, it's static, and this text is going to show the user whatever that username variable is. Then I've dragged in a divider and then an input field. The label on the input field just says set username, and then it says previous chats or friends are deleted. Basically, if people want to make new usernames, we don't want them to think that they can just take all of them. Then we have 2 buttons. So the first one is check availability. So here's what we're going to do for the first one. In our URL here, we are going to type this out. So you can pause the video if you aren't downloading this from codelessfix.com. Basically, we're typing in this portion, which is saying go to the first half of the URL, and then we're adding in our project, which, if you remember, we just made this a second ago, and this is our project ID, which shows right here. Then we're going to go and add in this part, which is basically the rest of the URL. And then we're going to put profiles. And what this is this, when we go over in Firebase, you'll see we have a profiles collection, and it has all of the usernames that have been made. So basically we're saying check that with the page variable username. So if we put all this together, this is basically saying go to the website that is the equivalent of this collection here, and then check this list for the username that the user has entered. And this is a GET request, so you can just check that setting here. Now, if you are installing or setting this up on your own and you're not downloading it, then you need to install the HTTP request, and anything else we cover in this video that you don't have, you can just go to Marketplace, search for it, click the one you want, and click Install. And then it'll appear in the installed section. So if you get confused about any of the logic at any point, I have a bunch of other tutorials on my channel and over at codethisfix.com. So once this is done, we have a toast here and a toast here. That logic can be found when you've clicked the button over here. You can just drag it over. So the first one is username taken. The second one is username available. So let's explain this. When this HTTP request runs, you'll see in the outputs section, we have output at port 1 and then output at port 2 and 3, which is these 3 pieces here. So when we do this GET request, if it succeeds, so basically what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're doing a GET request at this URL. If it works, we're going to say, you know what, that already exists, it's taken. If it doesn't work, or other way around. So basically, if this GET request, what we're doing is we're saying at the top one, it's taken, meaning we're able to find that username. Down here, it's the opposite. That username's not found, it's available. And then set username, we're going to go through this logic together next. So we're going to start out with the component tap and go to drag over the HTTP request. And for this HTTP request, we'll see if we can make things kind of line up a little bit better. So the HTTP request here is another GET. You can copy this in, which should be the same as what we were just doing, because the idea is if you have a bunch of users, you still want to do a last minute check before you give this username out. So we're doing essentially the same GET request, but you can pause the video here or get the app from codethisfix.com. And then we're going to do an if condition at the top. The middle one will go here, which we'll explain why in a second. The bottom one is an error message. So the if condition is going to be the following. You can type in is empty and then this text. If that's confusing, I'll show you. When you type in is underscore, you'll actually see Appgyver will help you find things to basically finish up your formula. So if we start typing here output, you'll see we have http request.res body, which is the response body, and it basically typed it for us. So we're saying if this is empty, and then we're going to do some additional logic. So to back it up and make it make sense, when we click the button, it's going to do a final check, and if that check succeeds, like we are able to do that request, we're going to do this if condition. And that's checking if the response body is empty. Now, if this request has this middle node, it's going to treat it like the true statement of this if condition and run this next one. Otherwise, it's just a generic toast error. So now let's keep going. Now, connected to the true as well as to the middle node of the previous is this HTTP request here. Connected to the false is the toast message username taken. So this HTTP request is a delete. Kind of unnecessary, but the idea here is we don't want too much data in the database, so you can copy this out to learn more about it. But the idea is we have a second collection called profile details, and you'll see this is where we have 2 user IDs, or UIDs, because this is the UID in Firebase. So when you sign in on Firebase, you're given this unique ID. And this unique ID, we're saying tie it to a username. This way, if a user decides to add this, we're deleting the profile detail with their temp profile URL, so they don't have the others anymore. Just kind of doing some cleanup. And then all three of these nodes connect to this next request, which is a post. The idea is, regardless of what happens, I just want to go ahead and get them signed up with this new username. So this is going to be a post. You'll see it is posting to the exact same URL with a slight modification here. What this does is we're saying we're going to re-add the temp profile. So we're deleting this and this document, and then we're putting it back. So the URL is a little bit different. Instead of just a slash, we add in this portion here, and then the temp profile URL. Again, you can pause the video, type it out, or get the rest from codelessfix.com. Now, this is a post instead of a get. So this is what the request body is going to look like. It's very straightforward. In brackets, we're saying, here are the fields. This is the only one. So the username is going to be the string value for our page variable username. And then there's a couple of additional brackets. So when you've done that, you can tie the bottom two to an error, or tie the top one to this request here, which is a second post. And again, you can pause the video here, but we're posting to profiles now. So these two work together. Profile details ties the username to their unique ID in Firebase, so we don't lose it. Profiles stores all the usernames, so we know whose has been taken. So here we are posting to this database here. And then if there are failures, we go to the same error dialog. Otherwise, we're going to get a message saying changes saved. So this is a pretty complicated flow. Feel free to pause the video at any point and break it down a little further. And you can clean this up and make sure that when users are changing usernames that they're deleting the old ones. You can basically optimize this a lot more is what I'm saying. So we're going to go ahead and save our changes. So at this point, what we've done is we've enabled a user to check the username database, which is profiles, for the username they're trying to get. And then we've enabled them to tie their email address, which is this, it's tied to this UID in Firebase. This is just every user. We're tying that username to that. So now, once you have done this, my recommendation is to go ahead and try to test it, because you're going to need that test data in Firebase anyway. So you can go ahead and click check availability. Yours should say available because there's nothing there. And then if you get errors, you may need to just set a username first to make sure the collection's available. So go ahead, type in a username and click set. Make sure that the data comes through to Firebase. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to our data tab, and we are going to add in profile details. So when you go to data, you can click add data resource, REST API direct integration, and it'll drop you in a page like this. And you can type in exactly what I have here. Profile details, profile details. This is the first half of the URL. If you're downloading this app from Codeless Fix, you'll need to replace this text with your Firebase ID, which again is always usually available near project in the URL for Firebase. You'll see here it says test, but the actual ID has some additional characters. So you'll fill out yours here, and then in the get collection, you'll see yours will look just like mine, and we'll add in /profile details. Here we'll type in documents, and you can go to test, run test, make sure you have some data here and click set schema from response and save. We'll be able to use this a little bit later, but the general idea is this allows us to have some sample data stored in our app so that we can define things further. So once this is done, you have your account page set up. So now what we want to do is set up our chat page. And again, you can change things up, but we want to make sure that we have a couple of things taken care of there. Now, before we jump into the chat page, one thing I did want to make sure that I made a note of, which I haven't covered yet, on our account page, when we click page layout, we want to make sure that we assign our username by default so that the system always knows what it is. So when you go to page layout over in the account page that we've made, you're going to drag over get current user. If you don't already have it, you can install it. We did that previously. And then connected to this is going to be over here, this set app variable option. So when we scroll through, you'll see it right here. And then connected to this is going to be a get record and a set page variable. So let's go through this really quickly together. In the get current user, there's nothing you have to update. When we go to set app variable, we're going to set the app variable temp profile URL, which we made at the beginning of the video. And we're going to assign the value output of another node, get current user, and we'll scroll all the way down to UID. As I mentioned earlier, this is this ID here, which is the unique ID for the user. Now, if you ever need to know this information for specific users, when you go to your authentication page, you'll see the UID next to each of the users here. So you'll see we have 6LU. If we go back to our database, you'll see we have 6LU and we have 6LU. So let's go back here. We've set that. Output of this is going to go to this get record, which we have over here, so we can drag that over. Then we're going to drag over set page variable. Now, one thing we have to do for this get record is go to our profile details that we just created. We're going to go to get record, and you're going to add this to your URL. And basically, we just need to add this in down here, which usually comes by default. So you'll just have a URL placeholder. It'll be ID and ID, and it's not static. So when we go to test, the ID appears here, and the idea is we would just need a sample bit of text. So you should be able to copy this and drop it in here as a test, and you can click Run Test, and at this point you'll typically see whatever the error may be. So when you're doing this test, you'll see error from response, and typically it'll give you some details about what error was or wasn't found. In this case, I added in a space at the beginning, so that's why there's that error. It's important to pay attention to that, so if we add that space back and you click Run, if you look really closely, you can see it here. So we're going to click Run Test. We now pulled in this sample data, so we can click Set Schema from Response, save, go back to where we just were, and in our get record, if you don't see profile details, you need to add it to your page. Very simple. You just click the variable slider, click data variables, and you can add the data variable, but I don't think it's needed in this case. So when we go, we click get record, profile details is the one you want to select, and the ID, we're going to bind it to the app variable, temp profile URL, which we created earlier. And then we're going to click set page variable, which when you scroll through is over here. We're going to set the page variable username, which we made earlier. This is our page variable, the only one we have. And we're going to go to assigned value, output of another node, get record, and this is all the sample data we just looked at, and we're just going to click our username here. So basically when this page loads, it's going to save our username. All right, now we can make that transition over to our chat page. So we're going to build out part of this now. So on this page, we are going to have all the same app variables because those transfer everywhere. We're going to have a page variable for message and a page variable for username. And then we're going to add a page parameter called selected person. Now, once we do this, we're going to build out this field together. So what we have here is just a title. And then you can drag over, I'll show you what this looks like and why I've set it up this way. So over in title, I have then dragged over a container. So you can go find it here and drag it over. And then in that container, there's a scroll view with a container inside of it. So I'll show you how I did that and explain why I did that. So when we set this up, you can drag them inside of each other just like this. And then you can drag your text inside of that. So you'll see it has a similar view right here. So now I'll delete that and show you why I did it that way. So we have our container here. This is our text container. This is the whole thing. So there's nothing special about it outside of we are setting the width of this container because we don't want it to grow and expand too much. So what we're going to do in this layout section is we're going to click Formula in the width. So by default, you'll typically say grow to full width. Go down to Custom, and in this field here, click, and you can actually find this specific formula yourself. You can just type in System, and then, or the easier one is Viewport. And then you'll see we have width and height. So for this first one, I've just put width by double clicking. The second one is a little different. So in the formula, I've done the exact same thing. I typed in viewport height, but then space/space 2, basically dividing it by 2. What this does is gives us kind of like a half-page section here. So once that's built, you then have your container set to a specific width and height. The scroll view means regardless of how big or small the container is, we're going to enable the user to scroll within it. Inside that scroll view is another container because this container is what's being repeated here. So in that container, there's text and text. So I just dragged over 2 text fields. Now, text field 1, you're going to add the following content. We're going to go to Formula, and you're going to have message, semicolon, space, in double quotes, and then space plus space, and then we'll type out the rest of this later. So this is what you want. And then below that, because again, we're going to take a break here because we have to add some other things. Then you can add in your input field. So on this left-hand side here, you're going to add in your input field by dragging it over. The message is just the label, and then the value is bound to your page variable. So you go to page variable and find message. And then you're going to have a send button. So we can go ahead and build out the send button logic because it's nothing too complicated. So what we're going to do is you can type out this formula yourself if you would like. The idea is same first half of the URL, grabbing the project, second half of the URL, and then at the end it's going to be params selected person. So if you type in PARA, you'll see your page parameters here, and this is the one we added earlier. And this is going to be a post, and you'll see in our request body, this is what it's going to look like. It's similar to what we had before, so we have fields, we have chat, and we're specifying it's a string value message, and then we have username, string value, username. Now, if you want a shortcut on how to structure those, we've added one of these data resources already. So we added profile details together. If you grab this URL, and if we were to, for example, grab, I'll just put it in here so we have the full URL, and I'll cancel that. So when we go back in, you'll see we'll actually need to delete this really quickly. So we take that URL, we can paste it in a different page because we've already built it together, and you'll see we have fields, username, string value, and these brackets. So you can copy this information and paste it into this request body if that makes it easier for you. And then you just need to swap out your page variables where they need to go. So we have one for chat and one for username. And then we are going to set the page variable after you make sure, I need to highlight this needs to be a post. Then you're going to set your page variable message, and assigned value is nothing. Basically, we're just clearing out the text box. Now, what we need to do is go to our page layout, and we're actually, if you want to make it a little bit easier, you can go to your account page and go to your page layout that we built together. You can highlight all of these and hit copy or Control C. Come back to chat and paste that in right here. And it's the same thing. Make sure that all of the information copies over. Sometimes links can be broken, so you just want to make sure that when we're on this page, we're assigning the correct username. So most of this page has already been built out. Now, we don't have a way to get this data to populate yet because this send button is going to be sending data, but it's sending it to a chat that doesn't technically exist yet. So we have to now go build that page, and then we can wrap things up. So we're going to go to the Find People page. The very first thing I'm sure that you have guessed at this point is on page layout, since you should already have it copied still, paste in the exact same flow that we had previously. So get user, this is the same thing that's on the My Account page. Get current user, set your temporary profile URL, get record, and get the username. It's the same on every single page at page layout. Next up, we're going to add a title, an input field, a button, a divider, and then similar to the other page, we're going to have a scroll view with a title and a container. Inside of it is a container with a text box. So let's go through what this looks like and how it functions together. So what we're doing is this is going to be something called a repeated variable. So to make this work, you need a data resource that actually has data in it. So to get that data set up, what we're going to do is set up our add button first. So this input field has a page variable for friend. So let's go over our variables. We have a page variable for friend, a page variable for option 1, option 2, selected friend, and username. Go ahead and get all of these added. If you need to pause the video, feel free. And then the username field is tied to the friend page variable. Now when we click add, we're going to do this. We're going to get the current user, which technically isn't needed, but we're just going to do it to be safe. So on component tap, get current user, then do an HTTP request, which is a get, and we're going to get from this URL here. So you can pause the video and type it out, or again, get it from codelessfix.com. But basically, we're getting from the profile pages page, and we're checking the friend name that we just typed in. Now, if it fails, it's going to be an error. If these two happen, the top two nodes, it's going to do this, which is a post. And this post looks like this. It's a little different. And the URL is the same as the previous ones. You'll notice in every page we're using this exact same half. The difference is we have a temporary profile URL here, and then a collection called friends, and we're adding in a document for this friend. So to make that make sense for you, hopefully, you'll see this is my UID in Firebase. If you remember, when I was on the web app, for example, I added 2 users, and you'll see we have those 2 friends here. Or that was just at the beginning of the video. And then this user only has 1 friend. So we are going to post to this URL, and we're going to post similar content as before. We're just pasting in the username, page variables, friend. And this, again, it is a post. If it works, we'll have a toast saying added. Otherwise, a toast saying error. So we're doing a check to make sure that the username exists so that people just can't add any random text. And then if it works, we're adding it. So what you can now do is go into your app, because you now need sample data, and go into this username field and click add and make sure it works and that something appears in Firebase. Once this is done, we can get our data resource set up for friends. So we're going to go add data resource, REST API direct integration, friends, and then you're going to copy the information I have here and swap this out for the same Firebase project ID that you had previously. So in this case, you have your URL here, and then under get, you'll copy what this page looks like in your Firebase setup. So we're saying we're going to have something unique here. We're checking for documents, and you'll have your URL placeholder. You can just click add, and again, copy what I have. So now when we go to test, it's going to look like this, and this is how we're actually conducting our test. So we can put static text, and in this case, we can just try to find a user ID. I've noticed in Firebase it adds a 2F next to it, so you just copy what would basically be this specific URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to paste here and click Run Test, and you'll see we get the format. So now we can click Set Schema from Response. Now, when we're posting, one important thing to note is this Add button here. When it's doing this post, it's the user ID and basically just the word friend. So it's creating this field here that says, okay, this is the user ID and then the text friends. So you'll see we have temporary profile, friends, and then just our document ID. So you have your get collection set up, you have your schema. Get record for this will look just like this, so you can copy my screen as well. And if you need to, I can't remember if we're going to need this specifically or not. Let me double check. It never hurts to add it, so you can click Run Test, Set Schema from Response, and click Save. And then your data variables are now working, so now we can do our data item in repeat. So we have our scroll view here that we've already added previously. Inside that scroll view, we have a title, and you can just call it Friends or whatever you need. And then underneath that, we have a container. Now, inside that container is a separate container. Now, the way this is set up is you can set your structure up however you want, but the idea is what matters the most is that this container is going to be repeating. So what you need to think about when you're building this structure, and the reason I put all of this in a scroll view, is as this content's expanding, people can scroll within this scroll view window instead of everything just constantly getting bigger. So if you want, you can go to the layout and set a different width and height for the scroll view, but basically I have my scroll view and then I have my container, and then in my container there's a separate one. So in order to do a data item in repeat, we need to get that item on our page. So we're going to go to Data Variable, and you click Add Data Variable, and you'll find the one for friends that we just made. And you just click to add it. Now when you click on these, if you need to update your ID, so we're adding it to the page. So once we've added it, we're going to make sure Collection of Records is set. And to optimize your app, this delay here is how often it's fetching data on each page. If you decide to pay for Firebase storage, make sure you understand how this works, because every 5,000 milliseconds, it's checking this page. So if someone leaves it, it's checking a large number of times over the day. So if you start paying as you go, then those limits can increase very, very rapidly and result in large amounts of money needing to be paid. So just bear that in mind. So we are going to use collection of data records, and you should have ID because you copied my page and we have it set up just like this. And you're going to bind it to a formula, and you're going to type this out. It's going to be Appgyver's temp profile URL, space plus space, friends in quotes. And then you can click Save. So now that it's been added to the page, what we can do is go to our scroll view and our container in a container, and we're going to find that inside container, and we're going to find the repeat with option. Click it, choose data variable, and select friends. Now at this point, when it repeats with friends, you'll see it start to look kind of like this. It'll have these bluish lines going across. So your text inside that container is going to have content. So we'll click here, data item in repeat, current, and the idea here would be you would try to find whatever that string value is for that collection or that record or whatever it may be. So for example, in this case, you'll see if I go to formula, you'll see what mine looks like. Now in this case, there can sometimes be errors related to how this information is collected and configuring your data resource. But the general idea here is, for example, mine's working as expected. So most of the time you should just be able to type this formula out. So it's repeated.current.fields.username.string_value. So you'll see we have a couple of errors here, although yours should still work, just like mine is working now. But if you have any issues with it, we're using the friends resource here. So you'll need to go to your collection, make sure that your schema is set and your get record is set, and that you can do the get record for both without any issues. So once that's set up, you should start seeing some sample content in here. So now what we're going to do is we have to decide what happens when we click on this. So you'll click on the text field, and this will look messy. So I'm going to try to spread things out just a bit to make it a little easier to understand, and I'll try to break it down. But again, I recommend that you just go ahead and download it from Codeless Fix because this is quite a bit. So we'll speed through this part. So on component tap, we're setting the page variable, option 1, which we made earlier, and we're assigning it this formula. Repeated current fields, username string value, and we're assigning it pagevar's username. Option 2, which happens at just after, is going to be set to this. Once this is done, I added in the toast message that I mentioned earlier that we can delete if we need to. You'll see we have those toast messages here. They're just the page variable so that you can see if you have issues what's actually happening. So it's basically when you click on it, it's showing the toast message, but I'll delete those for now. The output is a GET request to this URL. You could pause the video if you need it. And the output of that is an error for the bottom two, and for the top, it's an if condition. So you can copy this out, but we're checking if that URL is empty. If it is, we're going to do this. If it's not, we're going to move on. So if it is empty, we're going to do a GET request to this URL. And if that runs, we're going to do this if condition. So the first if condition, if it's true, we'll go down to this request, which will do a new if condition. If the first one's false, it'll open the page chat. Now I'll explain why we're doing this. So if you think about it, when a user clicks here, it's going to say, all right, create a chat. But we never know which user is going to create the chat first. So when we make a chat, it's going to be, for example, a chat name is chat 1234123. That's the first username plus the second. But we never know the order. The username 123 could come first. So we're checking for both instances. So the idea is after you have your option 1, that's username 1 and username 2. Option 2 is username 2 and then username 1. So we're checking for both cases. So our if condition here checks the output of this HTTP request. And again, if it, on the top node, if it's true, we're going to do this request. But the difference is we're checking for option 2. Now, if it's false, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and you'll see it's open page. And we're going to open the page chat. And here, this parameter which we made earlier, you're going to put option 1. Now, following this, if we'll do the same if condition, if it's empty for the HTTP request, making sure we're specifying this one, then we're going to do this dialog. So if it fails, we get this error. If it is empty, we're going to confirm here that we're going to start a chat. If it's false, meaning this isn't empty, we're going to open the page chat, but instead set selected person to option 2. Now this dialog here says start chat. So if yes, we're going to do this post here. It's going to be this content. Feel free to pause here if you need it. Otherwise, or what we're posting is this information. So chat, username, just to get a structure built. Then you can set navigation to open page, chat, and it's going to be option 1, or an error if it fails. And then this page here for chat is option 2. And that's the one that happens if this fails. So let's walk through the logic so that you understand it. The idea here is we have page variable for option 1, which is going to be whoever selected from the list plus the page variable for username. Option 2 is just the opposite, username and the person selected from the list. Then we're doing our checks to say, okay, if the first one exists, open the page for that. If it doesn't exist, check for the other one. If that doesn't exist, make it. If it does exist, open the page for it. So pretty straightforward. Now, what we're going to do here is basically we can go ahead and kind of close out this page here. Everything should be functioning for the most part. So at this point, you have an account page. You should be able to go here, set your username, check for availability, then go home, click here, click add a friend, and see your friends. From that point, you should be able to click on a friend. Now you won't see chats, which is perfectly fine. But what we're going to go ahead and do is we will do a couple of checks, but just basically making sure that everything's working. So at this point, we are going to finish up our chat page. So what you need to do now is when this page has loaded, you've actually loaded your chat page. As we've done before, you need to go to your messages box and you need to send a message. So we did this logic earlier. So it's this HTTP post to this URL with this information. This is going to populate some sample data on the back end. Now what we're going to do is go to the Data tab and add in our very last resource. Add resource REST API. And you can copy what I have here, making sure to swap out this for your Firebase ID. And then same thing as before, copy my screen here, just like we've done to set the ID. Go to test, and in this case, static text, just to get some sample data. And the idea here is when your test pops up, you should get some data in a collection in your URL here that'll say chat, and then the 2 usernames. So we can paste it in here and click run test, and you'll see if it gives you any errors. Now, remember if you need to add in any spaces or anything like that, and sometimes you need to mess around with things. For example, here, I added in chat, and that's not needed because it's on the other screen. So now you'll see we have sample data, and we can click set schema from response and save. The reason we have to do this is to populate our chat box. So just like we did earlier, we have our container with our scroll view that we made a little while ago earlier in the video. So just like we did on the last page, we're going to find our container in our scroll view, and we are going to use a formula this time. So don't forget to go to your data variables for the page and add chat1 like we did previously for the other page for your friends list. And then in the container here, you'll have text and text. So what we're going to do for the container is we're going to use a formula. And the reason we're using a formula is we want these to be in order. So we're going to put order in all caps, and then in parentheses, we're going to type it out. So I'll show you how you can build this easily. Type in order, and when you double click down here, it'll give you list. You'll just type in data and find the data resource that you just added to your page. And then sorting criteria is going to be ASC, meaning the newest is at the bottom, so ascending order, or DESC if you want it the other way. And that's, and then you just make sure that you have create time in between. So it's your data resource, what you're organizing it by, and ascending order. Then For text 1, we're going to have a formula. We're going to put in double quotes message, semicolon, space, space plus space, and then repeated current fields, so you can type this out. This is basically repeating the chats. Then for the user, you repeat the process, formula, and you're repeating it for the username. And then once you've done that, it should look similar to this, where it'll have this blue field here. And now when you click on your pages, you'll see those data items, and you'll see that it should load for each page. So the idea is this is dynamic. You'll see we have hey, hey back, the letters. If we click on a different page, hey other person. So what it's doing is it's basically saying, pass this to this page and make sure that it is this value. If you click on the chat page by itself, nothing's going to load. So at this point, you should be able to go through and test. I know that this was a longer video and that this was somewhat complicated. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below. There is also a forums page over at codelessfix.com. If you have any questions, again, drop them in the comment box, and I'll see you all in the next video.